welcome back. I'm Loretta Hayes at Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware. And today, in our next in the series of creative videos, is going to be pincushions. Everybody needs a new pincushion, whether it's you want a second pincushion to put on your cutting table, or you know, your old pincushion has gotten a little ratty, and besides which they're really cute and they don't take very much time. So today I'm going to show two different pincushions. The first is from a pattern and is more traditionally cut out. So this is the tomato pincushion from Happy Patterns. And then our second is going to be the new die that AccuQuilt has released that is cutting out for pincushions. The die number is 55209, so 55209. So let's start out with the pattern one. And on the pattern, we have just one pattern piece for the main body of our pincushion. And so here's a couple of samples of the pincushion when they are finished. Lots of fun fabrics, super easy to do. So the first piece of fabric that you're going to be cutting out is going to be this football shape. So this is the fabric that I'm going to be using for mine, and there's the football shape for it. It is symmetrical, so you don't have to worry about having right sides together or anything like that. Just go ahead and stack up 5 pieces of fabric that is going to be covered from this. So really you need an 1/8 of a yard, a 1/4 of a yard, a fat quarter. You could even make this from scraps out of your stash. You know, the ultimate goal is to use that stash. The other pieces that are cut out from this pattern are the felt pieces that are going to be the top of the tomato. And so these guys here I did very traditionally, and I did them in green, but I thought I would mix it up this time. And so my large piece and my stem are going to actually be this really cute bright pink. And then my centerpiece is going to be a little bit of light pink. So it'll be kind of like this one for the contrast, but of course in pink. So you're going to go ahead and cut those out. I scissor cut all of these, so I didn't do anything extraordinary for this part here. And on our machine, let's head over to the machine to get sewing on this. And so on our machine, we're going to be set up very much like we would be if we were quilting. So I have an all-purpose thread, a 80-12 universal needle, and I've put on my 1/4 inch foot with the guide, which for this particular Bernina is the 57D. If you're working with Bernina's, numbers that you're looking for are 37, 57, or 97. And so those are all 1/4 inch presser feet. And that's what we're going to be doing for our seam. So we're going to start out, we're going to take 2 of the footballs. If you have any directionality in your fabrics, now's the time to pay attention to those. You'll notice that I chose no fabrics that had directionality. Including the one I'm sewing today, because it's supposed to be fun and easy, and directionality means we have to pay attention. So we're going to start out, starting at the top of the football, we are going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam. And we're going to go down to the other end of the football. We'll do a little scissor cut and remove that. Then we're going to come in and we're going to take 2 more footballs and we're going to sew those together. And we'll do a little scissor cut there. And what I did for mine so that it would stuff really nicely is I took this over to the ironing board and I just gave it a little bit of a press while it was flat, kind of heat set it, and then came in with the point of my iron and pressed that seam allowance. And I pressed mine to the side. Pressing open 1/4 inch seam allowances are not terribly fun to do. So we'll come in and we'll press those. So now we have 4 of our 5 pieces together. So we're now going to take and we're going to line up our next piece, and we're going to line it up right over the edge of the football again. So once again, we're not doing anything unusual here. If you want to, if it makes it better for you visually, if you've pressed the seam, so you can see I pressed my seam allowance this direction. So I lined up the edge of my football right with that edge there. And I'll do the same thing on the other edge. You can certainly pin this, but I found that it pretty much, it goes together. Now when I get started on this next section, because now we're getting 3-dimensional. So when I get started on my next section, I'm going to start in about 1/4 inch, just to kind of minimize a little bit of bulk. And we'll line up as we go along. You can double check that your football is lined up down here at that end, because this edge here is on the bias, so it really stretches to fit really well. And we'll come in and we'll do just a little back tack, and we'll go ahead and cut our thread. So now we're starting to get a more 3-dimensional effect, and you can see why pressing it before you stuff it makes such a difference. So you see how nice and smooth this seam is and how it kind of rumples a little bit when you are unpressed. So let's go ahead and take care of that seam there. And just taking the nose of your iron will usually do that without any problems. If you have a little craft iron, maybe one that you take on retreats whenever we get back to doing that, then the small point might work really well for that. So we're looking pretty good here. Now we need to come in and we need to do our last seam. So the last seam is really going to be kind of almost like a circular, but I actually like to treat it as 2 seams. So I'm going to come in here. We're going to get our seams lined up. I'm going to line right up on the seam, 1/4 inch along the guide. So I'm coming down, I'm going to stop at where the seam is. I'm not going to go all the way across, do a little back tack, and then we'll go ahead and cut our thread going on here. Now the reason why I want to do this as 2 seams is this way I can still get in and I can press this seam here. The last seam is going to be a little bit tough to do that way, but the last seam is where we're going to be hand stitching anyway. So we'll go in there, we'll give that a little bit of a press. Okay, so looking good. Now, last seam. We're so excited, right? You know, this thing is going together super fast, whatnot. Make certain when you're doing this last seam that you pause in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to sew about an inch, inch and a half. I'm going to do a little back tack, and then I'm going to jump over, and I'm going to leave this opening, because remember, we need something to flip this with, and we also need to be able to get our stuffing in there. So sometimes we're like, everything is flowing. You might be making a bunch of these for your sewing friends. And so when we get into that kind of piecemeal mentality, sometimes we get sewing a little bit more than we intended to. So we'll come in here, we'll do a little back tack. The back tack's going to make it easier when we go to stuff it. We're not going to be opening up the seam. And then we'll hop over, and I'll sew about an inch above the bottom, do another little back tack, and then we'll finish this out. Now, if you are a quilter and you are used to, like, let's say we're doing Y seams and we're having to be super perfect about hitting the dot, that's really great, okay, but not a need for this pincushion. We're just getting close. Then we can come in and we can flip this around. And what is inevitably going to happen is one end of it is going to look really great, and the other end is going to be like, maybe we could have done better on that. We're not picking this out, okay? We're going to be putting this thing on top, right? So you're just going to pick the better end as the bottom of your pincushion, which you would see, and the least best end on the top section. Now, once we got this flipped around, looking really good here, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start stuffing. Now, stuffing of pincushions. Pincushions, you know how you use your pincushions. If you have pins in your pincushion that have not been removed anytime recently, then you probably want to go to the added benefit of stuffing your pincushion with a little bit of, say, ground walnut shells. There is something that you can buy at the pet store. It's called lizard gravel. It's what they put at the bottom of the lizard cage, which is basically crushed up shells. And so you want to put some of that in there, because then as you're putting your pins in, it's actually like sharpening your pins. In either case, if you're going to do, I'm going to stuff mine. These are just stuffed really hard with regular polyester fill. But if you are planning on doing some of that lizard gravel, what you might want to do is you might want to do a little bit of stuffing around the edge and kind of drop the lizard gravel in the middle, because then the outside of the pincushion is going to be really smooth. The gravel is going to give you a little bit of a bumpy look on there. So let's go ahead and we're going to stick this in. You want to be using polyester fill. You know your polyester fill is good when you pick it up. Let me get this started here, excuse me. There we go. So when you pick it up and you pull your polyester fill, and it's really kind of floaty like a cloud. And if you squish it and then it comes back out, you know this is going to be a really good fill to do. Sometimes we have those bags of fill that have been in the back of our closet for a little while, and they're older, and what you'll find is when you wad it up, it literally stays wadded up. And so that's why we sometimes, if we're stuffing animals, you know, like for a stuffed animal or whatnot, they're real lumpy. It's not that we haven't used the correct technique. It's just that we need to upgrade our polyfill. So we're going to go in, we're going to stuff this. I just kind of get it started, and then I use my thumb to press it in. And I gotta say that these little tomatoes, to get them as firm as I would like, I used way more polyfill than I thought I was going to need. So I was like, oh, you know, just a little bit of polyfill will fill this up, but not really. Not, you know, you want to have a good amount. You want this nice and firm. And I find that once you get it started, it just folds right on in there. And you can kind of test it as you're going along, see if you like the firmness. Stuffing things is always a little bit more of a difficult thing to explain as a teacher because, you know, how firm is firm on a video. So feel the firmness of your pincushion that you're using right now. Maybe use that as a gauge. Okey-doke. So I'm going to leave that opening open because I think I would like a little bit more firmness, and I didn't bring any more in my bag on there. So we'll get a little bit of extra in there. But you can see that it has a good amount of firmness to it. When my cat was playing with it, it bounced around really easily. Now, what I was talking about when you're looking at the top of your pincushion. So we're looking at the pincushion, and so on this side here, I've got quite a little pleat going on there. On the other side, we're looking pretty good. We have a little bit of a pleat, but I think that'll stuff out with a little bit more stuffing. So just randomly pick it. You know, pick what is your least favorite. That is going to become the top of your pincushion. So how this stacks out is this is going to go on top there. Then we're going to take our middle piece and we're going to place that there. And we're going to take our stem and that's going to go on top. And for those of you who know me well, I do not do a lot of handwork, but even I could handle this. So what we want to do when we're doing our stem is we're going to take it and we're going to roll it up. So just roll it as tight as you can get it. I've taken a double thread, which has a knot at the end of it. And I went in and we're just going to go ahead and we're just going to do a little whip stitch. So if you're not familiar with handwork, you're going to go into one side, catch the edge of it. You end up with a little bit of a diagonal stitch. And it makes this really cute little stem. I found that it took maybe about 10 stitches. Now when you get down to the bottom of the stem, don't get all neat and cut your thread because we're going to use that to start stitching our stem to the tomato. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to go through the two pieces of felt into the pincushion a little bit because we don't want to just stitch the felt together. We want to stitch it to the pincushion. And we're going to take and we're going to start our stitch. We're going to pick up a little bit of our stem. And then the next stitch that I take on the pincushion is going to be a little bit, we're kind of doing like a little bit of a circle for this stem. So we'll go ahead, we'll stitch that. And as soon as you do that, see how the stem is starting to stick up? So we'll come in, we'll catch the edge of our stem again. So I'll pull this over here. Just stitch in the stem just a little bit. And then once again, we're going to go into the pincushion through the felt. and we'll continue to go around and around our stem until you feel like the stem is completely attached. I went kind of around mine twice because if I'm going to do handwork, I want to do handwork now once, and I'm not a fan of mending, so I'm going to get this guy on really, really good. So I'll continue to go around that, and that will attach that. And you can take a look. We'll just grab another pincushion that's already done, and you can see it hides nicely going along right in the edge, but just all the way around the circle. Once we have that done, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to sew up the side of our tomato pincushion. So remember, I'm going to leave this open because I'm going to leave a little bit of stuffing. So when we do the AccuQuilt one here, I'll show you what I do for the ladder stitch to close up that one. So let's set this aside and let's move on to the AccuQuilt die. So the AccuQuilt cuts out two things. It cuts out actually the actual pincushion. So that's going to be a square, and it's going to be a long rectangle that goes around the outside of it. But it also has some embellishments. So you have the sewing machine and the thread spool where we can take and we can add the embellishment. So if we look at the die, you'll see that the die has a long piece and then a square, and then it's got a little picture of the sewing machine and a little picture of the pincushion. So when you're cutting out pincushions for this, you need one of these pieces, but you need two of these because you need the top and the bottom of the pincushion. So what you're going to do is you're going to lay one piece of fabric going across here, two pieces of fabric going here. If you're going to do your embellishments, take your piece of fabric that you're going to make your embellishment with and fuse it with a fusible. So it could be a Wonder Under, it could be a Steam-A-Seam 2. Really, the only thing I don't really use is like Heat and Bond because it doesn't stitch, you can't stitch through it well. Keep it kind of on the light side. So with my embellishment, what I did is I took a striped piece of fabric. So this is my fabric for my thread. I just thought that was really cute. And so I ironed a piece of the fusible to the back, and then I laid it on top of the spool. So I just kind of figured out where I wanted, and I thought the little stripes made it kind of look a little bit more like thread. So now I have this piece. When I ran it through the AccuQuilt cutter, I now have a little piece that has a little bit of fusible web to it. And so we can peel that paper and we have the fusible web to the back. So we're going to iron that onto the squares. So here's my cutout pincushion. So this was the piece that was there, and then I had two layers that were going on there. And so I then cut out my piece, and you could like layer up a bunch. Remember, you can do up to 6 layers at a time, so you could cut multiple pincushions at one time. So we're going to take and put my little spool of thread on top of my pincushion, and we need to get this appliqued first. So we're going to take it over to the ironing board, and we're just going to do a press. It's kind of a 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, not an iron action, but a fusing action. And so we now have our applique on the edge. So on the picture on the front of the die, they did a little bit of free motion for the thread, or they did just an outline of it with a straight stitch. I thought because I wanted those threads to show up, I thought that I would do a little bit of a blanket stitch around the edge. So we're going to change presser feet, And we're going to go to an open toe foot. So I had my 1/4 inch foot on, right? So if I do anything other than a straight stitch, I'm going to break my needle. So this foot here is an open toe applique foot. So there's nothing between us and the needle. So it's going to be really easy for me to do my shape. So we'll pop that on. Probably want to do it in not a gray thread. So let me put something a little bit darker on there. Gotta love needle threaders. And I'm going to select a little blanket stitch. So nothing big because I don't have a very big applique there. However, I do need to support this. Even with it fused, I need to do a little bit of support to it. But we don't want to get gung-ho on the support. This is Tear Easy. It's done by Sulky. And it does what its name says. So it tears away easily when we're done. Things like Pellon Stitch and Tear might be a little bit heavy for this. So we're going to place this underneath of our applique. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. I think I'm going to start on kind of a flat edge at the bottom. Just try and hide it. And so for the blanket stitch, we want the straight stitch to be on the background. So in my case, it's on the polka dot. We're going to have our needle stop down. We're going to pick up our foot. Could flip that around, put the foot down. Now on these points, you may want to kind of shift it a little bit so that the blanket stitch isn't flying way out into the background. So we'll come in. We're basically going to stop with our needle in the background every single time for this applique. So as I'm stitching, when I get to this corner, I want to have my needle over on this side, on the background side, rather than on the applique side. And so I'll pick that up. We'll go ahead and turn this around. And so if I just put my foot down here, the blanket stitch is going to kind of go off because we've got that really narrow point. So I'm going to pick up my needle, pick up my presser foot, and it's what I refer to as doing a fudge. So we're just going to fudge that corner, make it look nice. And that's where the open toe applique foot really comes in, because you can see it. There's nothing between you and the needle. And so you can line that up. You could always take and gently hand turn the needle down if you weren't sure where it was going to land. And we're just moving our way around the spool. One more corner. And when we get to the end here, we want to take it and we do want to do like a little bit of a back stitch there just to anchor that in. We could drop our feed dogs and stitch in place. Lots of different ways. A lot of machines will have like a tack section. In the case of the Bernina, it looks like a little bit of a pretzel. It's like it's tying a knot. So any of those things, and we just want to make sure that we anchor it because once again, fun to make, but we don't want to have to mend it later on. So now we have our blanket stitch. My thread match goes so nicely with the fabric. You might actually see it better from the back side on there. So we'll come around and it looks like that. So now we want to take and remove that Tear Easy. And so what you want to do is you want to put it down on the table. You want to put your thumb next to the stitching. And you're just going to pull up against your thumbnail. The urge sometimes is to do this, like go like that. And when you go like that, you tend to distort your stitches. So if you have the support of the table and the support of your thumbnail, you can go ahead and take that all the way around. Now you could take the center bit out here as well. It's really just a case of hooking it. And if you can't hook it, it's okay. What we can do is either get like a pointy pair of scissors or a little seam ripper, that kind of thing. Just get it started. And then once again, you're going to use that thumb and the table to support that to get rid of the stabilizer. For a pin cushion, you probably could get away with leaving that in the pin cushion, but getting rid of it, it gives you kind of a more fluid effect here, coming down like that. All right, so we are now ready to construct this pin cushion. So we did a little bit of applique. Now we're going to take our pieces. So we're going to have 2 squares and a rectangle. Now, the really cool thing, I didn't even notice it until I got it cut, is that when it cuts this rectangle, it also cuts little notches on the side of the rectangle. I did not cut those. The die cut those. And so that's what we're going to be using to line up on our corners, so we don't have to guess about that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to sew the short end of the rectangle. This is where we're going to be stuffing it. So we're going to do just a little bit of stitching here and a little bit of stitching here. And just like on the tomato pin cushion, we're going to take and do a seam and leave it open for pressing. So, or for stuffing, excuse me. So let's get our thread put back to normal. I don't think I want black thread in my seam. And we're going to go back to our 1/4 inch foot. Okay, we're going to be back to a straight stitch. And we're ready to go. So we'll go ahead and we'll sew a little bit of a seam here. So we're going to do a back tack. This is a tiny little edge. So make sure that you give yourself enough room to actually do the stuffing. So we've got that going on there. I'm going to take it over to the ironing board. And this time I'm actually, because it's much easier to do on a straight edge, I'm going to actually press that seam allowance open. So now we are ready to attach this to our square. So we're going to line up the seam on the middle of the side, and magically those 2 little niches are going to line up on the corners. Now the first one I did, I pinned. The second one I didn't pin. I found it was actually in some ways easier without the pins because it's just a tiny little seam. The other thing that you could do is just kind of anchor the seams on the side using a little clip on there. But whatever is most comfortable for you, we're going to sew until basically we get right to the bottom of that notch. We're going to pick up our foot. We're going to flip it around and we're going to line up the next one. And we're going to sew down for the next one. Get to the notch. We're going to pick up our foot. Flip it around. Line up the notch on the other side. And what I found is as I was lining everything up, if you just pull that little pleat that forms on the corner off to the left-hand side, never gets caught up because we're doing such a narrow seam allowance. Down to the point, pick up the foot, and we've got one more seam. Remember to do a little back tack at the corner there because that's where you stopped and started. And we've got 2/3 of our pincushion ready to go. So now we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to line up the notches on the side and we're going to sew the other side. But I thought it was really cool that they cut the notches for you on the die. Not sure if I was designing the die, whether I would have thought of that. Maybe after the die was all made and then, oh, I should have put a notch in there. Smarter people than me design these things. All right, coming down to that notch again. Flip it around. Line up the next notch. And then one more side. So you can see these things sew together so fast. So if you're looking for like gifts for your sewing friends, that kind of thing, this would be super simple to do. Remember to do your little back tack and then go ahead and cut. And then we're going to find the opening on the side and we're going to flip this baby around. And there we go. Once you get that done, find something to poke it out that isn't your scissors, ladies. When you are putting the point of the scissors, we think we're going to be so gentle with it, and we always end up poking at the end. So something like this. This is actually just a tool that came in with some stuffing for actually, it's a stuffing tool. But I mean, it basically looks like a chopstick. So go to your local Chinese restaurant, order takeout, and get some tools for flipping around your pincushion. And so voila, there we go. At which point we would go ahead and stuff this. So I already have one that is stuffed. Actually, I have two that are stuffed. So this is what it looks like. And I did this one because I wanted to kind of point out to you that you can take on those squares. So this is my fabric that I cut this pincushion out of. But you see how it has these silver circles in it. So when I did my square, I just did a rough cut and I centered that up on the die so that I ended up with a circle on either side. So if you have something that's kind of more motify, you can do a little bit of fussy cutting even with the AccuQuilt die so that you're going to get that nice look. And then this one here was just kind of an all over, and there's all kinds of really nice sewing fabrics out now, ladies. So this would be fabulous to work with. All right, so we need to go ahead and we need to sew one of these seams up. I didn't thread my needle, so we'll show you how I thread my needle. For those of us who cannot see anymore, doing these tiny little baby holes will take me forever. So what you do is you put on the desktop needle threader, you put the eye of the needle down the needle slot, you lay your thread across the thread, and cleverly enough it has a little sign that says thread slot. So you just take and hold that gently. So slide that in, and then you press the button, and it normally threads. Oh, really? I use this thing all the time, so it's got to be the video that does. There we go. I don't know why it was fussing with me. All right, so you go ahead and pull the loop through, and then when I'm doing my pin cushions, I always go ahead and I always do a double thread just to make it a little bit strong. We're going to tie a knot. My knot tying skills are fairly primitive. How I tie a knot is I put the thread and I wrap it around the needle. The more times you wrap it, the bigger the knot is. And then I just shoot the needle through, slide it down, and that gives you a nice knot. I find if I try and tie knots, I end up with like a string of knots. So this gives me one big knot. All right, so let's go ahead and do this little guy. And so there he is. And the only thing that I'm going to do different for this is I'm going to do a ladder stitch. So we're going to start out, we're going to go from the inside of the fabric to the outside of the fabric. And then I'm going to go directly across, and I'm going to go into the material and out of the material. Flip that up, come directly across. It's called a ladder stitch because it looks like a ladder. So we're going to go right along the edge, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to go up about a, like a little less than 1/4 inch, then directly across, and we're just working our way. So you'll notice I'm getting quite a few stitches in without closing the opening. So I'll get about 4 or 5 of them in, and then I'll go ahead and I'll pull, and it'll bring those edges together. So we'll go ahead and we'll continue. If you need to, just kind of put your finger in there to get the stuffing to stay in. And so we'll work our way up. Once again, it's such a small opening. It's not difficult to work with. We'll do a couple of stitches and then we'll knot off. So with the ladder stitch, once you get it where you want, we'll just do a few stitches through and just send your needle through. Growing up in the sewing machine industry, I'm all about the sewing machine. So I'm sure that there's a lot of you that could come in and do the video and give a much better hand stitch presentation. But there we go. We'll trim out that little loop. And we've got that set. So what I'm planning on doing for this guy is, I like it as it is, but I was kind of messing around and I found some decorative buttons. So I'm going to take and I'm going to put a decorative button on either side. So if you decide that you want to do that, then know that they make really big needles. So this is a doll needle. And so that doll needle is going to be it's not going to get lost in your pincushion. You'll be able to retrieve it from both sides. If you're going to do buttons, you need a stronger thread. And the thing I like about the doll needles and the heavy thread is I can thread to see it. I can see to thread it. All right, so we're going to go ahead, we're going to loop it again. So I've got 2. We'll tie our knot. If you're going to pick a side that is going to be the bottom side, that's where I would start. We're going to come up through the pincushion, figure out where we want to do. Go through our second hole, and we're going to head down. Now, little tricks of the trade. We're positioning it where we would like to. The urge is to pull this button super, super tight to the surface of the pincushion. Don't do that. Resist that urge. Let it hang about 1 inch, because then we can come through this button Let's try that one more time. All right, we need to go up from the bottom. There we go. All right, so now we're going to come through this button. I'm going to send it through. Kind of come up on the other hole. But because this button is loose, I can very easily thread the holes. If I pulled it really tight, then you're searching with the needle, trying to get the thread, you know, the needle point to go through those holes. So I'll do that. I'll come through, and now I'll start tightening it up. So I've got it anchored, and you can see by pulling it, we now have that little indent. So I'll come around and I'll do a little stitch in the bottom of the pincushion underneath this button to tack it on. I'll wrap a little bit of thread, and because of the strong thread and because we've gone through twice, it's going to stay put. So I hope you enjoyed doing the pincushions. I enjoyed making them. The patterns for the pincushions, once again, very, very simple, easy to do. Even if you've not done a lot of sewing, these would be excellent projects to do. So we'll see you next time. And Pam is doing she's doing a fabric book. She's my camera person, and she's lipping to me. She's going to be doing a fabric book next week. So we'll see you next week.